The Saturday morning had started like any other in the Thompson household. Deshawn Thompson had woken up at 7 o'clock, as she did every day, even on weekends. It was a habit from her nursing job at Grady Memorial Hospital. Her body had adapted to waking early, even when there was nowhere to be. She lay in bed for a few moments, listening to the sounds of her modest two-bedroom house in the quiet Atlanta suburb of Decatur. Birds chirped outside her window. The neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Everything was peaceful and ordinary. By 8:30, Deshawn had showered, dressed, and prepared a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. She sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of strong black coffee, scrolling through her phone and checking the weather forecast. Clear skies. 72 degrees. Perfect weather for outdoor play. She smiled to herself, thinking about how much her son Marcus loved spending time in the yard. At 3 years old, Marcus was at that magical age where everything was an adventure, where a simple patch of grass could become an entire universe of imagination. Marcus emerged from his bedroom around 9 o'clock, rubbing his eyes sleepily and dragging his favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out elephant named Ellie that had belonged to Deshawn when she was young. He was still in his Spider-Man pajamas, his curly hair sticking up at odd angles. Deshawn's heart melted at the sight of him, as it did every morning. She kissed the top of his head and set a small bowl of cereal in front of him. "Good morning, baby," she said softly. "You sleep good." Marcus nodded solemnly and began eating his cereal with the intense focus that only a toddler could muster. Deshawn watched him, grateful for these quiet moments before the day became chaotic. She thought about her shift at the hospital the next day, about the demanding patients and long hours. But that was tomorrow. Today belonged to her and Marcus alone. Her mother, Patricia, wasn't coming over until evening, and Deshawn had intentionally kept the day unscheduled. After breakfast, Deshawn changed Marcus into his favorite outdoor clothes, blue shorts with trucks on them, and a bright yellow shirt that made him look like a little sunflower. He insisted on wearing his light-up sneakers, even though they would just get dirty. Deshawn didn't argue. She had learned early in motherhood that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially on a beautiful Saturday morning. By 10:30, they were in the yard. The neighborhood was quiet, most of the residents still inside their homes. Deshawn had set up a lawn chair on the porch and carried out her book, a mystery novel she'd been trying to finish for weeks. Marcus played with his toy trucks in the grass, making engine sounds and telling elaborate stories to his collection of plastic vehicles. Every few minutes, he would look back at Deshawn, as if checking to make sure she was still there. She always waved and smiled, and he would return to his play with renewed enthusiasm. "Vroom, vroom," Marcus called out, making his red truck race across the lawn. "Faster, faster." Deshawn sipped her lemonade. She'd made a fresh pitcher that morning and turned a page in her book. The breeze was gentle and warm. Clouds drifted lazily across the blue sky. This was her favorite kind of day. Simple, peaceful, full of the small joys that made life meaningful. She thought about how quickly Marcus was growing, how in what seemed like just moments he'd gone from a newborn to a walking, talking, joke-telling little person. Deshawn had always wanted to be a mother, and Marcus had made that dream more rewarding than she'd ever imagined. Time passed in that easy, unmeasured way it does on a perfect Saturday. Deshawn lost herself in her book. Marcus created entire worlds in the grass. The sun climbed higher in the sky. At some point, Deshawn's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, called out a greeting from next door. They exchanged friendly waves. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then, at approximately 11:47 in the morning, everything changed forever. It started with a sound, a low rumbling that didn't belong. Deshawn barely registered it at first, her mind still engaged with her book. But then the sound grew louder. A vehicle engine. Not the gentle purr of a car, but something heavier. A truck. The rumbling grew to a roar. Deshawn looked up from her book, mildly curious about who might be making a delivery on their quiet residential street. What she saw next would haunt her for years to come. A large delivery truck, A white 18-wheeler with a commercial logo on the side was barreling down their street at an alarming speed. Too fast. Way too fast for a residential neighborhood where children played. Deshawn's stomach twisted with an instinctive sense of wrongness. Her eyes locked on the truck, and she watched in horror as it approached their house. The driver seemed to be struggling with the wheel, leaning forward as if fighting for control. "Marcus!" Deshawn screamed, her book falling to the ground. She lunged from her chair, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "Marcus!" But time moved in slow motion. Marcus was at least 30 feet away, still playing with his trucks, his small figure centered in the yard. He heard his mother's scream and looked up, confused by the sudden change in her tone. He was too far away. She couldn't reach him in time. The truck's driver made a desperate attempt to correct course, yanking the steering wheel hard to the right. Tires squealed against the asphalt. The truck skidded, its massive frame sliding sideways as it veered off the road. The mailbox at the end of their driveway exploded into splinters as the truck clipped it. Then the front bumper crashed through their white picket fence like it was made of paper. The vehicle continued its violent trajectory, grinding across the lawn with the force of an avalanche. Deshawn sprinted across the yard, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Her scream seemed to come from somewhere outside her body. Everything moved in fragments. The enormous shadow of the truck falling across the grass, the sound of the engine, the smell of burning rubber, the terrified expression on Marcus's tiny face as he realized something terrible was happening. The truck finally skidded to a halt, its front tires tearing up the lawn, its bumper stopping just 7 feet from where Marcus sat frozen, holding his toy truck. Had the driver not corrected course even slightly, had the truck continued on its original trajectory, Marcus would have been crushed instantly. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then Deshawn reached Marcus and scooped him into her arms. He was crying now, a raw, primal sound of terror. His body shook violently against hers. She held him so tightly she worried she might hurt him, but she couldn't let go, couldn't convince herself he was safe. The truck's door opened and the driver stumbled out, his face white as death, his entire body trembling. He was a middle-aged man with fear-stricken eyes. He started toward them, his mouth moving, but no coherent words emerged, just gasps and prayers. "Stay back," Deshawn shouted, turning away from him, shielding Marcus with her body. Her hands moved over her son frantically, checking for injuries. His right knee was scraped. There were some bruises forming on his arm, but he was alive. He was breathing. His bones seemed intact. But the physical injuries were nothing compared to the terror in his eyes, the way his entire body trembled, the broken, desperate quality of his cries. Something had changed in him in those few seconds. The carefree, playful boy of just moments ago was gone, replaced by a traumatized child who had witnessed his own near death. In the distance, a siren began to wail. The first week after the incident was a blur of hospital visits, police reports, and sleepless nights. Marcus had been taken to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for a complete evaluation, while the physical injuries, a scraped knee, some bruises, a mild contusion on his left arm, were relatively minor. The emotional trauma was evident in his behavior. He refused to sleep alone. He flinched at sudden noises. He had regressed in his speech, becoming quieter and more withdrawn. The pediatrician explained that these were normal responses to trauma in young children, but the words offered little comfort to Deshawn. The truck driver, whose name was David Patterson, had been cited for reckless driving and operating a commercial vehicle without proper licensing. According to the police report, his brakes had failed as he was descending the hill toward their neighborhood. He claimed he'd pumped the brake pedal repeatedly, but nothing happened. The truck's company, Southeastern Transport Solutions, was already launching an investigation into the mechanical failure. Deshawn had taken 2 weeks off from the hospital. She sat with Marcus on the couch during the day, watching him play quietly with his toys, no longer running and laughing like before. Her mother, Patricia, had moved into the house temporarily, helping with meals and cleaning while Deshawn focused entirely on Marcus. Deshawn's own emotional state was fragile. She kept replaying that moment. The moment she heard the engine, the moment she realized what was about to happen, the moment of helpless horror as she ran toward her son. In her darker moments, she would calculate the difference of a few feet, a few seconds. If he'd been standing a little further into the yard, if she'd been slower reaching him, if the driver had corrected course an instant later. She couldn't go down that path. Then the letters started arriving. The first one came 9 days after the incident. It was a thick envelope with official letterhead from Morrison and Associates, a law firm representing the insurance company for Southeastern Transport Solutions. Deshawn opened it with shaking hands, thinking perhaps it was to inform her of the insurance claim process or to offer preliminary settlement discussions. Instead, what she read made her blood run cold. The letter was carefully worded, but the implication was clear and vicious. While acknowledging that a truck had been involved in the incident, the letter suggested that the accident may not have been the sole cause of Marcus's injuries. It pointed out that Deshawn had allowed a 3-year-old child to play unsupervised in a front yard adjacent to a public street. It questioned whether adequate barriers had been in place. It suggested that a responsible parent would have been positioned closer to the child at all times, particularly given his young age. It referenced several cases where courts had found parents partially liable in incidents involving children because of what was termed inadequate supervision. The letter concluded by suggesting that Deshawn's negligence had contributed to the accident, and that any settlement would need to account for this shared responsibility. Deshawn read it 3 times, convinced she was misunderstanding the words. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't fair. She had been right there. She had been watching. She had done nothing wrong, but they were trying to blame her. They were trying to shift responsibility from a driver whose brakes had failed onto a mother whose only crime was letting her child play in her own yard on a Saturday morning. She called her friend Michelle that evening, her voice breaking as she explained the letter. Michelle listened quietly, and when Deshawn finished, Michelle said only one thing. You need a lawyer. Not some general practice attorney, but someone who specializes in personal injury and fights corporations. That conversation led to Rebecca Sutton. Deshawn's initial call to Rebecca's office was transferred through 2 secretaries before Rebecca herself picked up the phone. Her voice was direct and professional, but not cold. Deshawn explained the situation, the incident, Marcus's condition, the letter from the insurance company. There was a pause on the other end of the line. They're playing dirty, Rebecca said finally. That's a standard intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll panic, that you'll accept a low settlement just to make the process go away. But listen to me, what you did was not negligence. You were supervising your child in a safe residential area. A truck with failed brakes struck your home. This is not your fault. Something in Rebecca's voice, the absolute certainty, the righteous anger, made Deshawn feel less alone for the first time since the incident. They scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday at Rebecca's office downtown. Deshawn brought with her the police report, hospital records, photographs of the damage to the house and yard, and the threatening letter from the insurance company. Rebecca reviewed everything with meticulous attention, making notes, asking pointed questions about the timeline and Deshawn's actions that day. Rebecca Sutton was in her mid-50s, with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had the kind of presence that commanded respect, the kind of person who had spent decades fighting on behalf of people who couldn't fight for themselves. Her office walls were lined with photos from cases she'd won, commendations from various legal organizations, and letters from grateful clients. Here's what we're going to do, Rebecca said, settling back in her leather chair. First, I'm going to file a counterclaim. We're not just defending against their accusations, we're going to attack. The truck was operating with failed brakes. The company failed to perform proper maintenance. The driver should never have been behind the wheel of that vehicle. will sue for medical expenses, emotional distress, psychological trauma, and will demand punitive damages. Deshawn felt a surge of hope but also fear. How long will this take? Could be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, Rebecca said honestly. These companies have teams of lawyers and they'll fight hard, but I've handled hundreds of cases like this. They're counting on the average person backing down because legal battles are expensive and exhausting, but we'll make them pay for what they've done to your family. Rebecca explained that she would be reaching out to independent mechanical experts to examine the truck and confirm that the brake failure was the result of negligent maintenance. She would subpoena maintenance records from Southeastern Transport Solutions. She would gather witness statements from neighbors who had seen the incident. She would document Marcus's medical and psychological condition going forward. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment intensified. The insurance company's lawyers sent follow-up letters, each one more aggressive than the last. They filed motions challenging the validity of Deshawn's claim. They requested extensive documentation about Deshawn's medical history, her financial records, and even her parenting practices. It was clear they were attempting to build a case that would discredit her completely, suggesting she was an unfit mother, that Marcus's injuries were exaggerated, that the entire family had a history of irresponsibility. Patricia, Deshawn's mother, sat at the kitchen table one evening as Deshawn reviewed yet another letter from the insurance company's lawyers. Patricia's face was flushed with anger. "These people are monsters," Patricia said. "They hit your baby with a truck and now they're blaming you for it. This is evil." Deshawn nodded numbly. She felt simultaneously stronger and more fragile than she'd ever been. She had Rebecca in her corner now, a warrior who understood the law and understood how to fight. But the process of fighting felt dehumanizing and exhausting. Every letter, every legal motion, every demand for documentation felt like another assault on her already traumatized family. One evening, after Marcus had finally fallen asleep, Deshawn sat alone in the quiet house and allowed herself to cry. She cried for the innocence Marcus had lost. She cried for the burden of fighting a massive corporation with unlimited resources. She cried because she was afraid of what would happen if they lost, afraid of what this legal battle would do to her family. But underneath the fear was something else: anger, determination, a fierce, protective love that would not allow these lawyers to bully her into silence or submission. She called Rebecca the next morning. "I want to fight," Deshawn said. "Whatever it takes. I want them to answer for what they've done to my son. I want them to learn that they can't just destroy a family and walk away." There was a smile in Rebecca's voice when she responded. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Welcome to war, Deshawn, and trust me, we're going to win this." 3 months after the incident, Rebecca Sutton sat across from Deshawn and Patricia in her office, delivering news that made Deshawn's heart sink. Judge Patricia Chen had ruled that Marcus's testimony was essential to the case. Despite his young age, despite the obvious challenges, the judge believed that Marcus's first-hand account of the incident would be crucial to establishing the facts. The insurance company had already suggested that Marcus was too young to be a reliable witness, that any testimony from a 3-year-old would be inadmissible hearsay. But Judge Chen had disagreed. She wanted to hear from Marcus directly. "This is good news," Rebecca assured them, though she understood their reservations. "A jury will be more moved by hearing Marcus's own words than by any expert testimony we could provide, but it does mean we have work to do." Deshawn felt the weight of this responsibility crash down on her shoulders. How could she put her traumatized son through this? How could she ask a child who had barely recovered from his terror to relive it in front of strangers in a courtroom? But she also understood that this was their best chance at justice. And Marcus, though he didn't know it yet, was their most powerful witness. Over the following weeks, a team assembled around Marcus. There was Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and courtroom testimony. There was Rebecca, who visited the Thompson home regularly. And there was Marcus's existing therapist, Dr. James Whitmore, who had been working with Marcus since shortly after the incident to help him process his trauma. The first step was an assessment. Dr. Sarah Chen spent 2 hours with Marcus in a specially equipped playroom, observing his behavior, his speech patterns, his emotional responses. Deshawn watched through a one-way glass window, her hands clenched in her lap. She saw Marcus point to pictures and toys, saw him become withdrawn when certain topics were broached, saw him show remarkable resilience despite his obvious emotional scars. Afterward, Dr. Chen met with Deshawn and Patricia in a quiet consultation room. Her expression was compassionate but direct. "Marcus has experienced genuine trauma," Dr. Chen said. "He shows classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. However, his cognitive development is normal for his age. He can understand simple questions and provide answers, though his vocabulary and communication abilities are limited, as they are for most 3-year-olds. The challenge is not his ability to remember or understand. It's his ability to communicate his experience in a formal setting, and his emotional ability to handle the stress of testimony." "Can we prepare him?" Patricia asked. "Is there a way to help him?" "Yes," Dr. Chen said, "but it requires patience, consistency, and a gentle approach. We need to desensitize him to the courtroom environment while simultaneously strengthening his memory of the incident and his ability to articulate it." What followed was an intense, but carefully structured preparation process. Rebecca obtained courtroom floor plans and photographs. She and Dr. Chen worked together to create a series of visual aids showing what a courtroom looked like, who would be present, what would happen. They made a child-friendly video showing a simplified courtroom scene. They explained to Marcus, in words he could understand, that there were people who needed to hear about the scary truck day. Deshawn began working with Marcus daily, in short, gentle sessions. She would sit with him and ask simple questions. "Marcus, do you remember the day the big truck came?" Marcus would nod slowly, his small face becoming more serious. "Can you tell Mommy what you saw?" "Truck," Marcus would say. "Big truck, fast." "That's right, baby, the truck was fast. Were you scared?" Marcus would nod vigorously, very scared. These sessions were heartbreaking for Deshawn. Each time she asked Marcus to recall the incident, she watched her son relive his trauma. His eyes would widen, his breathing would become rapid. Sometimes he would crawl into her lap and need to be held. But gradually, Marcus's ability to articulate what had happened improved. His vocabulary expanded. He could say, "I was playing. Truck came very fast. Mommy was scared. I was scared." They practiced repeatedly. Deshawn's mother would sometimes take the role of questioner, asking Marcus the same questions in slightly different ways, helping him understand that there were multiple ways to talk about the same experience. At 4 weeks into preparation, Rebecca arranged for Marcus to visit the actual courthouse. They went on a Saturday morning when the building was quiet. Rebecca showed Marcus the courtroom where the hearing would take place. She explained that he would sit in a special chair, a low one with cushions so he could be seen. She showed him where the judge would sit, where the lawyers would stand, where the jury would sit. "Will you be there?" Marcus asked Deshawn, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "Mommy will be right over there," Deshawn said, pointing to a spot near the back of the courtroom. "And I'll be able to see you the whole time. You won't be alone." Marcus seemed to absorb this information, though Deshawn wasn't certain how much he truly understood. The psychological evaluation was more extensive. Dr. Sarah Chen administered a series of age-appropriate tests designed to assess Marcus's cognitive ability, his memory, his suggestibility. The results confirmed what everyone suspected. Marcus was a normal, intelligent 3-year-old with no cognitive deficits. He could remember events. He was not unusually susceptible to suggestion. He could articulate his experiences. But there was a concern, Under stress, young children often regress. They forget words. They become confused. The courtroom would be stressful, crowded, loud, filled with strangers asking difficult questions. "We need to build his confidence," Dr. Chen recommended. "We need to help him feel strong and brave, not small and scared. And we need to prepare him for aggressive questioning." This last part was the most difficult. Rebecca began conducting mock cross-examinations with Marcus, but in a gentle way. She would ask him questions, sometimes challenging his answers, helping him practice responding to doubt. At first, Marcus would become upset and defensive, but gradually he learned that answering questions, even hard ones, was something he could do. "Marcus, are you sure the truck was going fast?" Rebecca would ask, playing the role of opposing counsel. Marcus would pause, considering. Then he would nod firmly and say, "Yes, very fast." "How do you know it was going fast?" "It was loud and scary, and it came very fast." Rebecca would smile and say, "That's exactly right, Marcus. You're doing great." By 2 months before the hearing, Marcus had made significant progress. He could describe the incident in basic terms. He understood that he would be talking to a judge. He had visited the courtroom and understood its basic structure. He was developing confidence. But there were still setbacks. One afternoon, as Deshawn was working through the preparation routine with Marcus, he suddenly dissolved into tears. "I don't want to talk about the truck," he cried, his small body shaking. "I don't want to talk about the scary truck." Deshawn held him, letting him cry, making a mental note to call Dr. Whitmore about this regression. "I know, baby," she whispered into his curly hair. "I know it's hard, but the people who need to hear about it will understand, and I'll be right there with you. You're so brave, Marcus. You're the bravest boy I know." Patricia and Deshawn talked late into many nights about whether they were doing the right thing. Patricia worried that the process itself was traumatizing him further. Deshawn understood the concern. She worried about it constantly. But Rebecca kept reminding them that not testifying meant the insurance company might prevail, might escape accountability, might convince others that it was acceptable to blame parents for accidents caused by corporate negligence. "Marcus will recover from this testimony," Rebecca said firmly. "But the message sent if we don't fight, that a corporation can destroy a family and face no consequences, that's a wound that could affect Marcus and countless other children for years to come." One evening, about 6 weeks before the hearing, Marcus came to Deshawn with his toy truck. He held it up and said, "Big truck came, I was playing. Mommy saved me." Deshawn's eyes filled with tears. In his own simple way, Marcus was processing his trauma. He was beginning to create a narrative where he was not a victim, but someone who had survived something scary. "That's right, baby," Deshawn said, pulling him close. "Mommy did save you, and you're going to be okay." As the hearing date approached, Marcus seemed to develop a kind of acceptance about what was to come. He didn't love the preparation sessions, but he participated. He understood in his limited way that he had something important to share. The fear hadn't disappeared. It might never fully disappear, but it had been joined by a tentative kind of courage. Deshawn prayed every night that she was making the right decision. She prayed that Marcus would find the strength to do what needed to be done. She prayed that his testimony would matter, that it would help bring justice to her family. The night before the hearing, Deshawn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every possible outcome. She'd gone through Marcus's preparation materials one last time before bed, making sure he had everything he needed. His favorite stuffed animal, Ellie the elephant, sat on his nightstand. A small notebook with drawings of the courtroom was in her purse. A child-sized booster seat that had been specially arranged would help him be visible to the judge and jury. At 5:47 a.m., Deshawn gave up on sleep and got out of bed. She showered and dressed carefully, selecting a professional but warm navy blue suit. She wanted to look respectable but not cold, authoritative but not intimidating. Rebecca had given her specific advice: appear like a concerned mother who had done nothing wrong. Every detail mattered. Marcus woke at 7:15 a.m., appearing smaller somehow than usual. Perhaps it was Deshawn's own anxiety projecting onto him, but he seemed more fragile, more vulnerable. She prepared his favorite breakfast, pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, though she wasn't sure he would eat. He picked at the pancakes, his usual enthusiasm absent. "Today's the big day," Deshawn said gently, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "Remember, we're going to talk to the judge about the truck." Marcus nodded solemnly. He was dressed in the outfit they'd selected weeks ago, khaki pants and a pale blue button-up shirt that made him look older than his 3 years. His curly hair had been carefully combed. He looked like a tiny, serious businessman. Patricia arrived at 8 o'clock to drive them to the courthouse. Rebecca had advised them to arrive early, before the media presence became overwhelming. The hearing was already generating local news interest. The story of a toddler testifying had captured people's imaginations. The drive downtown was quiet. Marcus sat in his car seat, Ellie clutched tightly in his small fists. Patricia kept glancing at her grandson in the rearview mirror, her expression a mixture of love and sadness. Deshawn held Marcus's hand when they stopped at red lights, squeezing gently. "You're going to do great today," she told him. "I'm so proud of you." As they approached the courthouse, Deshawn's stomach tightened. News vans were already parked outside the imposing stone building. Reporters with cameras loitered near the entrance. Word had spread that the hearing involving the 3-year-old witness would begin this morning. Rebecca met them in the parking garage, away from the media. She looked sharp and ready for battle in a crisp charcoal suit, her silver-streaked hair in its usual tight bun. She knelt down to Marcus's level, her expression warm but serious. "Marcus, you look very handsome today," Rebecca said. "Are you ready to be brave?" Marcus nodded quietly. "Good," Rebecca said. "Remember, you just answer the questions I ask you and you tell the truth. That's all you have to do. Can you do that?" "Yes," Marcus said. Rebecca stood and squeezed Deshawn's shoulder. "We've got this," she said with quiet confidence. "Let's go make some noise." They entered through a side entrance, avoiding most of the reporters, though a few spotted them and began shouting questions. Deshawn kept her focus on Marcus, shielding him as much as possible from the cameras and microphones. The courthouse corridor was a maze of marble and wood, lined with doors leading to different courtrooms. Their footsteps echoed as they walked. Other people passed them, lawyers carrying briefcases, court clerks, bailiffs. Marcus's eyes grew wider as they walked, his small hand gripping Deshawn's more tightly. "Stay close to Mommy," Deshawn whispered. The courtroom itself was larger than Marcus's preparation visits had prepared him for. Perhaps it was the presence of actual people, the court clerk at her desk, the bailiff in his uniform, lawyers already setting up at their tables. Or perhaps it was the formality of it all, the weight of the place itself. Judge Patricia Chen was already in her chambers, but they could see her through the open door. A woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair, wearing black robes. Her expression was unreadable. She had a reputation for fairness, but also for being exacting and no-nonsense. She had already ruled against the insurance company's motion to have Marcus's testimony deemed inadmissible, a decision that had surprised many legal observers. At the defense table sat Marcus Dalton, the opposing counsel. He was a tall, imposing man in his early 60s with silver hair slicked back and an expensive suit that screamed money and confidence. His expression as he watched Deshawn, Patricia, and young Marcus enter was coolly assessing. He leaned over to his associate and whispered something, both men smirking. Deshawn felt rage flash through her, but she kept her face neutral. Dalton stood and approached them as they settled near the plaintiff's table. His smile was predatory. "Ms. Thompson," he said smoothly, "I see you've brought your son. Interesting strategy, parading the child for sympathy." Rebecca stepped between them immediately, her voice ice cold. Don't speak to my client, Mr. Dalton, and be very careful about your tone regarding this child." Dalton raised his hands in mock surrender, but his eyes remained hard. "Just making an observation. Let's see how credible this little witness turns out to be." Patricia moved closer to Marcus, her protective stance making clear how much she'd like to physically remove Dalton from the courtroom. Deshawn placed a restraining hand on her mother's arm. "He's trying to intimidate us," Rebecca whispered. "Don't give him the satisfaction of a reaction." As the courtroom began to fill, Deshawn found herself overwhelmed by the number of people. Besides the judge and the lawyers, there were the jury, 12 men and women who would determine their fate. There were court reporters with their machines ready to transcribe every word. There were bailiffs and clerks. There were spectators in the gallery, reporters, curious onlookers, and apparently some law students here to observe an unusual case. Marcus pressed against Deshawn, his small body trembling slightly. She wrapped her arm around him, trying to project calm confidence she didn't feel. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. Everyone stood as Judge Patricia Chen entered. She moved with authority, her robes flowing around her as she took her seat on the bench. Her eyes swept the courtroom, pausing for a moment when they landed on Marcus. "Good morning," Judge Chen said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "This is a civil case, Thompson versus Southeastern Transport Solutions. Before we begin with opening statements, I want to address the presence of the minor witness." She looked directly at Marcus. "Young man, do you know what it means to tell the truth?" Marcus nodded slightly. "Can you tell me?" Judge Chen asked, not unkindly. "It means saying what really happened," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely carrying through the courtroom. Judge Chen nodded with what might have been approval. "That's exactly right. Your job today is to tell us the truth about what happened when the truck came. Can you do that?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Good," Judge Chen said. She turned to Rebecca. "Attorney Sutton, you may begin with your opening statement." Rebecca stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked toward the jury with the confidence of a warrior. Her opening statement was powerful, painting a picture of a young family on an ordinary Saturday, a truck with failed brakes, a mother's terror, a child's trauma. She spoke with passion about corporate negligence, about a company that cared more about profit margins than about maintaining their vehicles properly. When Rebecca finished, Dalton stood. His opening statement was different in tone, dismissive, almost mocking. He painted Deshawn as a negligent parent who had failed to properly supervise her son. He suggested that Marcus's young age and suggestibility made his testimony unreliable. He implied that the family was simply trying to get rich off an accident. As Deshawn listened to Dalton's words, her anxiety crystallized into anger. She squeezed Marcus's hand gently. Whatever happened today, this little boy was going to face down a powerful man who was going to try to make him look foolish, and he was going to do it anyway. Rebecca called her first witness, the accident investigator who had examined the truck. His testimony was technical and detailed, explaining how the brake system had failed due to inadequate maintenance. Dalton cross-examined aggressively, but the investigator's credentials and evidence were unassailable. The morning progressed through various witnesses: a neighbor who had seen the incident, the EMT who had responded to the scene, Marcus's pediatrician who testified about his injuries and psychological state. Then, at 11:47 a.m., exactly 4 months after the original incident, Judge Chen announced that it was time for Marcus's testimony. "Will the plaintiff call Marcus Thompson to the stand?" Judge Chen said. This was it. Deshawn's heart felt like it might explode from her chest. She gently took Marcus's hand. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "You're so brave, let's go." Marcus stood on shaking legs and walked toward the witness stand with his mother. Every eye in the courtroom was on him, this tiny child in his pale blue shirt, holding his mother's hand, preparing to testify against a powerful corporation represented by a ruthless attorney. Judge Chen's expression softened slightly as she watched him climb into the specially prepared seat. "Raise your right hand, please," the clerk said gently. Marcus raised his small hand. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Marcus said, his voice small but clear. Rebecca approached the witness stand, her expression warm and encouraging. Behind her, Dalton sat with his arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was confident this child would crack under pressure. "Marcus," Rebecca began gently, "can you tell me your name?" "Marcus Thompson," he said. "How old are you, Marcus?" "I'm 3, he said, "almost 4. "That's right," Rebecca said. "Marcus, I want to ask you about the day the truck came. Do you remember that day?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Can you tell me what you were doing that day?" Marcus took a breath. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath with him. "I was playing with my trucks in the yard," Marcus said. The hearing had begun, and in the gallery, Deshawn whispered a silent prayer. Rebecca began with the simplest of questions, her voice warm and steady, designed to help Marcus feel safe and supported rather than interrogated. "Marcus, I want to ask you about the day the big truck came. Were you scared that day?" Marcus nodded, his small hands gripping the sides of the witness seat. His feet didn't touch the ground. He was perched in a chair designed especially for his size, with cushions allowing him to be clearly visible to everyone in the courtroom. A stuffed animal, a small toy, had been allowed beside him for comfort. "I was very scared," Marcus said quietly. "Can you tell everyone here what happened? What were you doing before the truck came?" Marcus looked at his mother briefly, finding her face in the gallery. Deshawn nodded encouragingly. Marcus turned back to Rebecca. "I was playing with my trucks," Marcus said. "My toy trucks in the yard. Mommy was sitting on the porch." "That's very good, Marcus," Rebecca said. Her voice held genuine warmth. "What happened next?" "I heard a noise," Marcus said. "A big noise like a loud engine." "A loud engine," Rebecca repeated, helping to establish his memory. "Did the noise scare you?" "It was very loud," Marcus said, "and then Mommy screamed my name." Several people in the jury shifted in their seats. The image of a mother screaming her child's name was powerful, disturbing in its clarity. "What did you see when you heard the loud noise and your mommy scream?" Rebecca asked. Marcus's eyes grew wider as he recalled the moment. "The big truck, it was coming toward me, very fast, so fast I couldn't move, I was frozen." "You were frozen. That's when you felt very scared and couldn't move your body. Is that right?" "Yes," Marcus said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Very scared." Rebecca handed him a tissue. He wiped his eyes with it, a motion that seemed to break the hearts of several jurors who were watching this small child relive his trauma. "What happened when the truck came toward you?" Rebecca asked gently. "It got very close," Marcus said. I thought it was going to hit me." "But it didn't hit you, did it, Marcus?" "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Mommy ran and grabbed me." "Your mommy saved you," Rebecca said. "That was very brave of your mommy. How did the truck finally stop?" "It made a big noise, and the ground shook. And it stopped right there," Marcus said, pointing with his small finger as if the truck were still there in the courtroom. "Marcus, do you remember how fast the truck was going?" "Very fast," Marcus said emphatically. "Really, really fast, faster than the cars on the street." Rebecca showed him a series of photographs, pictures of the yard, the damage, the truck's final resting place. Marcus identified each one, his young voice confirming the details in simple but powerful language. "Marcus, did your mommy do anything wrong that day?" "No," Marcus said immediately. "Mommy was watching me. She was right there." "Thank you, Marcus," Rebecca said. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness at this time." The courtroom held its breath. Deshawn's hands were clasped so tightly her fingernails were drawing blood. Patricia's lips were moving in what looked like silent prayer. Judge Chen looked at Marcus Dalton. Does the defense wish to cross-examine? Dalton stood slowly, deliberately. He was a master of psychological warfare, and he intended to use every trick in his arsenal. As he approached the witness stand, he seemed to loom over the small boy, his shadow falling across Marcus's face. "Hello, Marcus," Dalton said, his voice dripping with false sweetness that didn't reach his eyes. "That was a very interesting story you told us. I just have a few questions." Marcus nodded warily, sensing the change in tone. "You said you were playing with toy trucks, correct?" "Yes," Marcus said. "And you were just a little boy playing in the yard, weren't you?" "I was playing," Marcus confirmed. "And you weren't really paying attention to what was happening around you, were you? You were focused on your toys." Marcus hesitated. This was a trick question, he seemed to sense, though he didn't have the words to articulate why. "I was playing, but I heard the truck," Marcus said carefully. "You heard the truck," Dalton repeated. "But you didn't actually see it coming toward you, did you? You only heard it." "I saw it," Marcus said, his voice becoming uncertain. "It was coming." "But you were scared, weren't you? You were so scared that you might have imagined things. When we're very scared, sometimes we imagine things that aren't exactly what happened, don't we?" Rebecca stood up. "Your Honor, I object. This witness is 3 years old. The attorney is attempting to confuse a traumatized child to undermine his credibility." Judge Chen's expression hardened. "Mr. Dalton, keep your questions age-appropriate. This child is not on trial, rephrase." Dalton smiled coldly. "Of course, Your Honor." He turned back to Marcus. "When the truck came, how fast do you think it was going?" "Very fast," Marcus said. "But you don't really know how fast is, do you? You're only 3 years old, you've never driven a car. So when you say very fast, you're really just guessing, aren't you?" Marcus's lip began to tremble. "It was fast, really fast." "Your mother told you to say it was going fast, didn't she? Before we came here today, she practiced with you and taught you what to say." "No," Marcus said, but doubt was creeping into his voice. "She practiced with you, didn't she? Asking you questions about the truck over and over, telling you what to remember." "She was helping me," Marcus said quietly. "Helping you say the right things, the things that would help your case." Rebecca stood again. "Your Honor, this is harassment of a minor witness. He's 3 years old. Of course his mother helped him understand what would happen here." "I agree," Judge Chen said, her voice sharp. "Mr. Dalton, move on with substantive questions." But Dalton's strategy was working. Marcus was becoming increasingly distressed. His hands were shaking. His answers were becoming less confident. "Let me ask you something, Marcus. How do you know your mommy didn't cause the truck to come? How do you know she wasn't doing something wrong?" "My mommy didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face now. "She was watching me." "But you don't really know that, do you? You were playing with toys. You weren't really paying attention to your mommy's behavior." Several jurors shifted uncomfortably, clearly troubled by the aggressive questioning of a 3-year-old. One woman in the front row had tears in her own eyes. "Do you know what a truck driver is supposed to do, Marcus?" Dalton continued relentlessly. Marcus shook his head, unable to speak. "You don't know anything about trucks, or how they work, or how they're supposed to be driven, do you?" "No," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "So really, you can't tell us anything reliable about how fast the truck was going or what the driver was doing, can you?" Deshawn stood up in the gallery. Patricia grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but Deshawn's maternal instinct had overridden her control. She was about to shout something when the bailiff moved toward her. Patricia whispered urgently, and Deshawn reluctantly sat back down, but her entire body was trembling with rage and maternal fury. Marcus was now visibly distressed, his small form shaking in the oversized witness chair. His face was blotchy from crying. His answers had become monosyllabic, yes, no, sometimes just shakes of his head. He looked so small, so vulnerable, so absolutely overwhelmed by the man standing over him. Rebecca's hands were clenched on the table. Judge Chen's jaw was set with displeasure, but she was allowing the cross-examination to continue, apparently giving Dalton room to make his case, no matter how ruthlessly he was doing it. Isn't it true, Marcus, that you don't really remember what happened that day? That you're just repeating what your mommy told you to say? No, Marcus whispered, I remember. You remember, or your mommy told you to say that you remember. Marcus's face crumpled. He didn't answer, just stared down at his small hands. The courtroom had become unbearably tense. The jury was watching Dalton's aggressive approach with visible discomfort. Some spectators shifted in their seats. The court reporter continued recording every word, every tears, every breakdown of this small child under interrogation. Dalton continued his assault for another 10 minutes, asking variations of the same questions, trying to get Marcus to contradict himself, trying to plant doubt about the reliability of his memory and the authenticity of his account. Marcus grew quieter and quieter, withdrawing into himself. His answers became barely audible. His eyes looked red and exhausted. Finally, Judge Chen intervened. Mr. Dalton, do you have any substantive questions remaining? Just a few more, Dalton said. No, Judge Chen said firmly. I think the witness has been questioned extensively. You may conclude your cross-examination. Dalton smiled, seeming satisfied with the damage he'd inflicted. No further questions, Your Honor. Marcus was visibly relieved to be released from the stand. Judge Chen showed genuine kindness as he stepped down, telling him he had done a good job and that he could go back to his mother. Marcus practically ran to Deshawn, who scooped him into her arms and held him tightly. The courtroom was quiet, but the silence was heavy with judgment. Some people looked angry, some looked sad, but almost everyone seemed to have witnessed something deeply unfair. A powerful lawyer bullying a traumatized 3-year-old to serve his client's financial interests. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus rushed into Deshawn's arms. She held him tightly, feeling his small body still trembling, his breath coming in gasps that were almost sobs. Patricia stroked his hair, whispering words of comfort. Rebecca was furious, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on Dalton with an intensity that could have melted steel. Judge Chen made a note on the pad in front of her, her expression unreadable. She looked at the clock on the courtroom wall. It was 1:15 p.m. We'll take a 15-minute recess, Judge Chen announced. Court will resume at 1:30. All parties remain available. The bailiff called for recess, and people began to move. Reporters immediately started trying to approach Deshawn and her family, but a bailiff blocked their path, allowing them to retreat to a private consultation room that Rebecca had arranged. In the small, quiet room with pale yellow walls and a single window overlooking downtown Atlanta, Deshawn sat with Marcus on her lap. He was inconsolable, hiccuping between sobs, repeating over and over, I tried to remember. You did so good, baby, Deshawn said, her own tears falling freely. You did so good. That man was just mean, but you told the truth. Patricia brought paper towels and water. Marcus's face was blotchy and exhausted. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. He looked like a child who had been through something far too difficult for his small age. Rebecca paced back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone on the other end. She hung up after a few minutes and looked at Deshawn. That was intentional psychological abuse, Rebecca said angrily. Dalton knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to break Marcus down, to make him look unreliable, to plant doubt in the jury's mind. And it worked, at least partially. The jury saw a frightened, confused child instead of a clear witness. But he told the truth, Deshawn said desperately. Everyone could see he was telling the truth. They could see he was traumatized. The jury saw both, Rebecca said grimly. And juries can be unpredictable. Some will see a brave child traumatized by both the incident and the attorney's cruelty. Others might see a confused 3-year-old whose testimony is unreliable. We need to shift the narrative when we present more evidence. But first, Rebecca was called by phone to Judge Chen's chambers. She returned 5 minutes later with an unusual expression, surprise mixed with hope. "The judge wants to speak with all attorneys in chambers," Rebecca said. "I don't know what this is about, but Chen seemed determined about something." Rebecca disappeared again, and Deshawn was left alone with Marcus and Patricia. She held her son, rocking him gently, trying to calm his anxious energy. Marcus had finally stopped crying, but he was still trembling, still fearful of what might come next. At 1:28 p.m., the bailiff announced that court would resume. Deshawn gathered Marcus into her arms and walked back into the courtroom. The atmosphere had shifted subtly. There was anticipation in the air, as if something unusual was about to happen. Judge Chen returned to her bench and everyone stood. But before proceeding with testimony, Judge Chen addressed the courtroom. "Before we continue, I want to address the state of our witness," Judge Chen said, her voice carrying a note that suggested she had made a significant decision. "This child has demonstrated courage in facing a difficult situation. However, his emotional state is clearly compromised by anxiety and trauma. As judge of this court, I have the authority to take measures to ensure all witnesses can provide their best testimony while maintaining their well-being." She paused, and Dalton's face registered concern. This didn't sound good for his case. "I have arranged for an emotional support animal to be present in the courtroom," Judge Chen continued. "This is a trained therapy dog whose presence is intended solely to provide psychological support to this minor witness. The animal will not influence his testimony, but may help reduce his anxiety. If anyone objects, they may state their objection now." Dalton was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, I vehemently object. This is an attempt to manipulate the witness and bias the jury. The presence of an animal will. It will help a traumatized child feel safer," Judge Chen interrupted, her voice ice cold. "If you cannot conduct yourself professionally around an animal, Mr. Dalton, perhaps we should question your fitness to practice law in this state. Sit down." The courtroom gasped. Judge Chen had just publicly rebuked Dalton in a way that was rare and powerful. Several jury members exchanged looks of surprise and, in some cases, approval. Dalton sat down, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Bailiff," Judge Chen said, "bring in the dog." A police officer entered from a side door, accompanied by a golden retriever of exceptional beauty and obvious training. Scout was a medium-sized dog with a coat of rich golden-brown fur and kind, intelligent eyes. She moved with practiced calm, neither pulling on the leash nor showing any anxiety about the formal courtroom environment. The officer guided her to a position near the witness stand, where a small cushioned mat had been prepared. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Some people seemed to approve of the judge's decision, while others, particularly Dalton and his team, looked outraged. Scout settled onto her mat with the grace of a professional. She didn't approach Marcus or anyone else. She simply lay down, her head resting on her paws, her eyes calm and peaceful. Deshawn watched Marcus's reaction carefully. She saw his eyes fix on Scout, saw the immediate shift in his body language. He stopped trembling. His breathing slowed. Some of the fear seemed to drain from his small frame, replaced by cautious curiosity. Judge Chen looked at Marcus. "Would you like to pet the dog, Marcus? Her name is Scout." Marcus looked at his mother. Deshawn nodded encouragingly. Marcus got down from her lap and walked slowly toward Scout. The entire courtroom watched this moment, a traumatized 3-year-old meeting a gentle animal. Scout's tail wagged slowly as Marcus approached. The dog's eyes were warm and accepting. Marcus reached out his small hand and touched Scout's soft fur. Something shifted in his expression, a slight relaxation, a moment of peace that hadn't been there before. Scout is a therapy dog, Judge Chen explained to the courtroom. She is trained to provide emotional support without interfering with courtroom proceedings. Her presence here is entirely appropriate and serves the interests of justice by helping our young witness feel secure enough to testify clearly. Scout turned her head slightly and gently licked Marcus's hand. The action was so pure, so innocent, so full of unconditional acceptance that even some of the reporters in the gallery seemed moved by it. Marcus smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile, but it was a genuine smile. Dalton made a motion to appeal the judge's decision, but Judge Chen shut him down immediately. Motion denied. We will proceed. Marcus was returned to the witness stand, and something remarkable had changed. He was still the same traumatized child, but Scout's presence seemed to have provided him with an anchor point, a connection to something safe and good in this frightening environment. Judge Chen looked at Rebecca. Attorney Sutton, do you have additional questions for this witness? Yes, Your Honor, Rebecca said. She glanced at Marcus, noting the change in him. Marcus, I know that was very hard. The man asked you a lot of questions and some of them were confusing and made you feel scared. But I want you to know that you did nothing wrong. You told the truth. Can you do that again now? Marcus nodded, his eyes occasionally drifting to Scout, who remained calm and present. Let me ask you again, Marcus. When the truck came toward you that day, how fast do you think it was going? Marcus looked at Scout, as if drawing courage from the dog's steady presence. When he spoke, his voice was clearer, steadier than it had been during Dalton's assault. It was going very fast, Marcus said. Faster than any car I've ever seen. It was scary because it was so fast. Did anyone tell you to say that? Did anyone teach you to say the truck was going fast? No, Marcus said. I remembered. The truck was loud and fast and I was scared because I thought it would hit me. The difference was subtle but significant. Marcus sounded more confident, more coherent. The presence of Scout seemed to have given him permission to be brave. Dalton stood again. Your Honor, I renew my objection to the presence of this animal. It is clearly influencing the witness's responses. Judge Chen didn't even glance at him. The animal is doing exactly what it was intended to do, providing emotional support. The witness's testimony is no less valid because he is less terrified. In fact, it's more reliable. Overruled. Please proceed, Attorney Sutton. As Rebecca continued her redirect examination, asking Marcus about details he had mentioned earlier, something profound had shifted. The courtroom seemed to understand that they were witnessing not just testimony, but something deeper, the power of compassion and support in the pursuit of justice. Scout lay peacefully on her mat, occasionally shifting position but remaining fully present, fully calm. Her role was silent, but her impact was undeniable. Rebecca continued her redirect examination with renewed confidence. With Scout's calming presence anchoring him, Marcus was able to articulate details about the incident that had been lost in his earlier trauma response during cross-examination. Marcus, let me ask you this, Rebecca said gently. When the truck was coming toward you, did you have time to move out of the way? Marcus shook his head slowly. I was frozen, I couldn't move. Why couldn't you move, Marcus? Because I was so scared, Marcus said, his voice steady but emotional. The truck was so loud and so fast and I didn't know what to do, and then Mommy grabbed me and we moved. So your mommy saved you, because the truck was coming so fast that you couldn't get away by yourself. Yes, Marcus said. If Mommy wasn't watching, if she didn't grab me, the truck would have hit me. The statement hung in the air of the courtroom like a bell that had just been rung. Several jury members nodded slightly, the implication clear. Deshawn's mother squeezed her daughter's hand. "Did anyone in your family tell you to blame the truck driver?" Rebecca asked. "No," Marcus said. "The truck was going too fast, that's what happened. The truck was too fast." "Thank you, Marcus," Rebecca said. "I have no further questions." Judge Chen looked toward the defense table. "Mr. Dalton, do you wish to conduct further cross-examination?" Dalton stood, and Deshawn felt her heart drop. She had hoped that perhaps, after seeing Scout's effect and witnessing the clarity Marcus had achieved, Dalton would decline further questioning. But she could see in his face that he intended to finish what he had started. He was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. "I do, Your Honor," Dalton said smoothly. He approached the witness stand again, and immediately Marcus's hand moved toward Scout as if seeking reassurance. "Marcus, let me ask you something," Dalton began, his tone once again taking on that edge of false sweetness mixed with condescension. "All these nice people have been asking you questions and treating you very carefully. That's made you feel safe, hasn't it?" Marcus didn't answer, sensing a trap in the question. "But I'm not here to make you feel safe," Dalton continued. "I'm here to find out the truth, so I'm going to ask you some hard questions and I want you to answer them honestly. Okay?" Marcus nodded hesitantly. "When your mother grabbed you, how far had the truck actually come? Was it really close to you, or was it still far away?" "It was close," Marcus said. "How close?" Dalton pressed. "Was it touching you? Was it almost touching you?" "It was close," Marcus said, uncertainty creeping back into his voice. "But you don't really know how close, do you? Because you were scared and not thinking clearly. You might remember it as being closer than it really was." Rebecca started to stand, but Judge Chen held up a hand, indicating she would allow the line of questioning to continue. "Your mother was the one watching you, correct?" Dalton continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "She was the one responsible for keeping you safe. Isn't it possible that she was not watching closely enough, that she let you play too close to the street, that if she had been more careful, you wouldn't have been in danger at all?" Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He looked toward his mother, his expression confused and hurt. "My mommy was watching me," Marcus said, his voice becoming smaller. "She was right there on the porch." "But how far away is the porch from where you were playing?" Dalton asked relentlessly. 30 feet, 40 feet. That's a long way, isn't it? A long way for a mother to be watching a 3-year-old. "She was watching," Marcus repeated, but now doubt was visible in his young face. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, standing, "this is the same line of questioning that was previously objected to. Mr. Dalton is attempting to shift blame from the truck driver to the child's mother by confusing a traumatized 3-year-old. Judge Chen's expression hardened. "Mr. Dalton, you've already covered this ground extensively. Move to new lines of inquiry or conclude your cross-examination." Dalton smiled coldly. "Of course, Your Honor. Marcus, let me ask you about the truck driver. Did you see the driver's face?" "No," Marcus said quietly. "Do you know if the driver was trying to stop the truck?" "He didn't stop," Marcus said. "The truck didn't stop until after." "After what?" Dalton pressed. "After Mommy grabbed me," Marcus finished. "So you don't actually know what the driver was doing or whether he was trying to stop. You only know that the truck kept coming, correct?" "Yes," Marcus said, his confidence completely eroded now. His entire body slumped in the oversized witness chair. Rebecca's jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like it might break. The judge's expression was one of barely controlled fury at Dalton's continued psychological assault on the child. "In fact," Dalton continued, his voice taking on a tone of mock reasoning, "couldn't the truck have hit a pothole or something in the street that caused it to veer toward the yard? You don't actually know what caused the truck to come toward you, do you? It could have been an accident, just like I said, with no negligence on anyone's part, couldn't it?" Marcus was now openly crying, his shoulders shaking. His hand had extended fully towards Scout, and the dog, sensing his distress, had lifted her head and was watching him intently with compassionate eyes. "Isn't that possible, Marcus?" Dalton pressed on, oblivious or unconcerned with the child's emotional state. That was the moment something shifted in the courtroom. Spectators were now visibly uncomfortable. One woman in the gallery had tears streaming down her face. A man in the back stood up as if he might intervene physically. The court reporter paused momentarily, seeming to struggle with documenting this assault. And then Marcus looked directly at Dalton. His tears had stopped. His small face, which had been crumpled in distress moments before, suddenly hardened with a clarity that seemed impossible for such a young child. "You're mean," Marcus said. The words were not loud. They were not dramatic. They were simply stated as fact, as clearly and certainly as any truth that had ever been spoken in that courtroom. The entire courtroom seemed to freeze. Dalton opened his mouth to respond, his face flushing with indignation that a 3-year-old had just called him out. But Marcus wasn't finished. Before anyone could move or speak, Marcus added, his voice steady and clear, each word carefully enunciated. "Truck fast." 2 words. Just 2 simple words from a traumatized 3-year-old, but they reverberated through the courtroom with the force of a revelation. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Judge Chen seemed momentarily stunned. Dalton's face turned purple with rage. He opened his mouth to attack the child further, but Judge Chen's voice cut through like a sword. "That's enough, Mr. Dalton," Judge Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You are excused from cross-examination." "Your Honor, Dalton began. "You are excused," Judge Chen repeated, her tone making clear that any further argument would result in contempt charges. "Bailiff, please escort the witness to his mother." Marcus practically flew from the witness chair. He ran to Deshawn, who scooped him up and held him so tightly that he could barely breathe. Patricia was crying openly. Even Rebecca had tears in her eyes. The courtroom was in chaos. Spectators were whispering urgently. Reporters were scribbling notes furiously. One of the jurors in the front row was openly weeping. Scout, having completed her role in this moment, remained on her mat, watching the scene with her intelligent, knowing eyes. What Marcus had just done was extraordinary. In those 2 simple statements, "You're mean" and "truck fast," he had cut through all of Dalton's legal maneuvering, all of his sophisticated psychological tactics, all of his attempts to confuse and manipulate. He had simply spoken truth. The truth that was visible to everyone in the courtroom. An adult was being cruel to a child, and a truck that was traveling too fast had nearly killed him. Judge Chen made a note on her pad, and her expression suggested she had witnessed something profound, not just testimony, but a moment of pure, unfiltered human honesty that transcended legal argument. Dalton returned to his seat, his face dark with fury and embarrassment. He had been defeated not by superior legal argument, but by the simple, devastating honesty of a 3-year-old child. The judge looked at the clock. It was 2:47 p.m. "We will take a 20-minute recess," Judge Chen announced. "All parties should be prepared to resume with closing arguments upon our return." As the courtroom cleared, people seemed to move in a daze, still processing what they had witnessed. That moment, those 2 words, had shifted something fundamental in the proceedings. Everyone in that room knew that something important had just happened, something that transcended the normal rules of legal combat. Marcus, finally calm in his mother's arms, looked exhausted but unburdened. He had said what needed to be said. He had told the truth in the clearest possible way. Scout remained on her mat, a silent witness to the power of innocence and honesty. The 20-minute recess felt like an eternity to Deshawn. She sat with Marcus in the private consultation room, holding him while he dozed fitfully against her shoulder. Patricia had brought water and crackers, though no one had much appetite. Rebecca reviewed her notes for closing arguments, her expression one of cautious optimism. "That moment changed things," Rebecca said quietly. "I've been practicing law for 32 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what I witnessed in that courtroom. A 3-year-old cutting through legal maneuvering with absolute truth. The jury felt it. The judge felt it. Even the reporters felt it." When court resumed, the energy in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. The jury members looked at Dalton differently now, with skepticism rather than acceptance. Several refused to meet his eyes. Rebecca's closing argument was brief but powerful. She reviewed the evidence: the mechanical investigation proving brake failure, the truck's poor maintenance record, the speed of impact, the medical evidence of trauma. But more than that, she spoke about what the jury had witnessed. "You heard from a 3-year-old boy who experienced terror," Rebecca said, her voice carrying genuine emotion. "You saw him relive trauma because a powerful attorney tried to bully him into recanting the truth. And in that moment, when he could have broken, when he could have given up and said whatever would make the questioning stop, Marcus Thompson did something remarkable. He spoke truth with perfect clarity. 'You're mean. Truck fast.' Those words contained more honesty than any sophisticated legal argument could possibly convey. This case is about whether a corporation that negligently maintained a vehicle will be held accountable. The evidence is overwhelming. The testimony is clear. Justice demands that you find in favor of Deshaun and Marcus Thompson." Dalton's closing argument was defensive and desperate. He attacked Marcus's credibility, suggested that the jury had been emotionally manipulated, argued that there were insufficient grounds to prove negligence. But his arguments rang hollow after everything the jury had witnessed. Judge Chen gave her instructions to the jury at 3:45 p.m. They deliberated for exactly 6 hours. At 9:53 p.m., they returned with a verdict. The jury foreman, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, stood. "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Deshaun Thompson, on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Deshaun grabbed Rebecca's hand. Patricia hugged her daughter. Marcus, who was being held by his mother, didn't fully understand what was happening, but he understood that something important had occurred. The jury awarded compensatory damages for medical expenses, therapy costs, pain and suffering, and emotional trauma in the amount of $847,000. But then Judge Chen addressed the question of punitive damages. Given the evidence of deliberate negligence in maintenance of this vehicle, the grossly negligent operation of the truck by an improperly licensed driver, and the reckless manner in which the defendant's insurance company attempted to shift blame to the child's mother, I am awarding additional punitive damages of $1.2 million to send a clear message that corporate negligence will not be tolerated in this state. The total was nearly $2.1 million. Southeastern Transport Solutions attorney immediately began filing motions for appeal and reduction of damages, but everyone in the courtroom understood that the case had been decided on a level deeper than simple legal argument. In the days and weeks that followed, the story went viral. Major news outlets picked up the narrative. 3-year-old's 2 words defeat corporate defense. Justice through innocence. The boy who spoke truth to power. Scout, the therapy dog, became a media sensation. Local news stations interviewed her handler, law professors discussed the case's implications, and legal journals began publishing articles about the precedent it established. Judge Chen's decision became a landmark ruling in Georgia. Her written opinion, released 3 weeks after the verdict, was remarkable in its recognition of what had transpired in her courtroom. The witness in this case was 3 years old. By conventional legal standards, his testimony should have been deemed unreliable, the product of a young mind with limited vocabulary, fragmented memory, and emotional instability. Yet I witnessed something in this courtroom that transcended legal convention. I witnessed a child who, despite being deliberately and aggressively questioned in a manner designed to confuse and discredit him, managed to articulate fundamental truth with perfect clarity. His words, "You're mean and truck fast," contain no ambiguity, no qualification, no susceptibility to manipulation. They represented unfiltered human honesty in response to injustice. The jury responded not to legal argument, but to the power of that honesty. This case establishes new standards for how child witnesses should be treated in judicial proceedings, with consideration given not only to the reliability of their testimony, but to their emotional welfare and access to appropriate support mechanisms. The ruling led to new protocols in Georgia courts. Therapy animals could now be used to support child witnesses. New standards were established for cross-examining minors. Child psychologists were routinely consulted when children were required to testify in significant cases. For the Thompson family, the impact was profound and multifaceted. The financial settlement allowed Deshawn to reduce her nursing shifts and spend more time with Marcus. The therapy costs were covered, ensuring that Marcus would receive professional support for years to come. But more importantly, the family's vindication was complete. The narrative had shifted from negligent parent to brave mother who protected her son from a reckless corporation. Marcus himself seemed to recover more quickly after the verdict, as if he had been holding his breath throughout the legal process, waiting for confirmation that what had happened was real and wrong and deserving of justice. Within weeks, he began sleeping better. He played with his toys with renewed enthusiasm. His speech continued to develop normally. The trauma didn't disappear. It would likely affect him in various ways throughout his life, but it no longer defined him. Scout became a celebrity in her own right. She was invited to schools across Georgia to participate in educational programs about the importance of therapy animals and emotional support. Her handler received numerous requests for interviews and appearances. Scout had become a symbol of compassion in the legal system, proof that there was room for humanity alongside justice. A year after the verdict, Deshawn, Marcus, Patricia, and Rebecca attended a ceremony where Judge Chen was honored by the Georgia Bar Association for her innovative approach to child witness protection. Scout attended as well, wearing a special medal around her neck. "This case taught us something important," Judge Chen said at the ceremony. "Justice is not served by breaking witnesses or by sophisticated legal maneuvering that obscures truth. Justice is served by seeking truth, protecting vulnerable witnesses, and creating an environment where honesty can flourish." A 3-year-old boy taught us that lesson, and a golden retriever showed us that compassion and justice can exist together. 2 years after the incident, Marcus started preschool. His mother watched him walk into the classroom, no longer the traumatized child who had flinched at loud noises, but a confident boy ready to engage with the world. He still had a toy truck, not the one from that day, but a new one. And sometimes when he played, he would tell stories about the big truck that was too fast and Mommy who saved me and Scout the nice dog. Deshawn kept photos from the trial, including one of Marcus and Scout together in the courtroom. She knew that someday, when Marcus was old enough to understand, she would tell him the full story. She would explain how he had helped change a legal system, how his honesty and courage had created protections for other children, how his simple words had resonated with a jury and a judge, and ultimately, with a nation. Rebecca Sutton continued to practice law, but she always kept Marcus's case at the forefront of her mind. It had become the case that defined her career, not because of the money awarded or the victory achieved, but because it had demonstrated the power of fighting for the vulnerable with passion and integrity. She eventually established a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families in legal battles against corporations, with Scout becoming the organization's unofficial mascot. Scout, the golden retriever with the knowing eyes, lived another 8 years after the trial, becoming a living reminder of the day when innocence and compassion defeated ruthlessness and manipulation. When she passed away, her handler scattered her ashes in a garden that the Thompson family had planted in her honor. Years later, when Marcus was 18 and preparing for college, he would receive a letter from Judge Patricia Chen. In it, she wrote, "I wanted you to know that I have never forgotten the day you spoke truth in my courtroom. You were 3 years old, and you showed more courage than many adults ever will. Your case has changed how we treat child witnesses in Georgia. Every child who has been protected because of the standards your case established owes you a debt of gratitude. Thank you for reminding us all that justice is, at its heart, about truth and compassion." That letter, framed and hung in Marcus's dorm room at the University of Georgia, served as a reminder of the day when a small boy's 2 words changed everything.